But we didn't, again, it's still, is it heat shock proteins that induce that? We don't know. But yeah, certainly around a single session of sauna, you can see certain physiological characteristics, but that's still getting debated. Like, for example, we didn't really stress the fact that blood pressure goes up so much inside a sauna till just a really nice research study came out just this year that demonstrated, guess what? Your blood pressure goes up quite a bit. And then it's after sauna bathing that all the benefits, that's when you really open up. So the stressor of being in a sauna is like running that marathon. And that's what makes me think it's doing it repeatedly and getting training with it and getting these mechanisms flowing that ends up with the health benefits. But this is all still being studied.
So welcome on the show, Dr. Joy Hussain. So excited to have you here because you have been in the field of saunas and infrared saunas for many, many years, right?
Well, since starting my PhD in 2013, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's great to be here.
Yes.
Anything to get the sauna word out.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And how on earth did you get into saunas as a research topic?
Well, it started, I first became interested when I had a position working as a doctor in Alaska.
Wow.
Actually, and growing up, I always had troubles with circulation in my hands and my feet. And so when I took this posting in Alaska, I thought, oh no, how am I going to survive? But as I was working there, saunas are part of the culture there. Everyone's saunas, especially in the wintertime.
Yeah.
And so my husband and I at the time, we started sauna bathing with people. And then we went on to build our own sauna. And at the time, I just did it socially. I didn't really think too much about the health aspects of it until we moved back to Australia. And then we lived a number of years without a sauna. And I started to notice my troubles with my circulation returned. Something called Raynaud's phenomenon. But then once we built a sauna in Melbourne and then started regularly sauna bathing again, it disappeared. So that was very potent for me to think, wow, what's going on with this sauna bathing?
Yeah.
And then it started to enlighten and read more about it and realize there wasn't a lot of research. This is, 7 years ago. So it got me very interested. And then that's when I met Mark Cohen, Professor Mark Cohen at RMIT. And I actually just wanted to do a little master's with them on sauna bathing, but he goes, oh, we need to do a PhD on this. Sauna bathing's big.
Yeah.
So that's what started me on my thesis project of looking at the health benefits of sauna bathing as well as sweating. So I'm looking at sauna bathing through that lens of sweating.
Oh wow. Yeah. So you would include other things that make you sweat as well, like, I don't know, is it exercising or?
Well, no. My focus is looking at sweat analysis during the sauna as well as the cardiovascular effects.
Wow.
But I'm definitely not losing sight of sweat. Sweat's a fascinating biofluid, and it's so understudied, and it's exploding right now in terms of potentially for use of in the medical system. So watch this sweaty space, because sweat I think, has the potential to take the place of blood. As well as, we use a lot of blood, urine, saliva less so, but I think sweat is moving in on that scene. There's a lot of research going on.
It's amazing. And so would you, analysis of sweat, is that something that takes a lot of time? Like, do we have to evaporate the whole sweat before we know anything? Or is that something that can be done quite quickly?
That's a great question. Because when you think about sweating, there's the sweat that remains on our skin, but sweat, our body is designed to evaporate that sweat. So right now, there are a lot of startup companies looking at how to capture sweat best. And it means capturing the air around sweat as well, because already many of the metabolites are becoming aerosolized.
Wow.
And in fact, I think a lot of communications go on in sweating that we just haven't been able to elucidate yet. Like, for example, there's been a fascinating study of handshaking.
Yeah.
That when you videotape people handshaking, we often smell our hands.
No.
And considering a lot of us sweat on our hands,
Yeah.
we could be smelling what connections. And then also think about women who live together,
Yes.
often start menstruating
Yes.
in sync.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has to do with pheromones communicating through sweat. I mean,
So the pheromones can actually be distributed throughout the room quite well with sweat. Yeah, of course.
why not? We
Yeah.
don't know
Why
yet.
would you? Yes.
But that is my suspicion. Yes, I think there's a lot more aerosolized sweat communications going on than we know yet.
Wow, how exciting.
So, and there's a lot of startup companies, especially here in Australia too, that are working on capturing how best to capture sweat
Yeah.
and how to analyze everything that's in it.
Interesting. So, are you saying, what do you think when thinking about sweat? So, are there quite a few elements that actually evaporate, and that's why we want to capture that all? If you don't, it's probably not just because we want to quantify exactly how much we sweat, and therefore we capture the air around it. Are there some elements that actually evaporate that are not water?
Definitely. Oh yeah, no. Water, that's what's fascinating, is in these last 7 years, there's much more in sweat than we ever thought. Yes, it is 99% water.
Yeah.
And that's because our major sweat gland, which there's really about 3 or 4 different types of sweat glands, but the major one, an eccrine sweat gland, produces a kind of water base, so 99% water.
Uh-huh.
But there are these others, the apocrine gland, which is around our genitals and underneath our arms.
Yes.
They produce a much more lipid-rich, more fat-based. And that's what gives if you've ever been in a sauna or exercised long-term, a longer duration, notice how your sweat can get kind of creamy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's because there's there's lipids coming out, more fat-based.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's very few ways for us to get rid of lipid sources of, quote, toxins.
Yes.
Because, most of the eccrine sweat is water-based, but these other glands that we don't completely understand their stimulation make more of a fat-based or lipid-based.
So would you agree that what we often think when we think about this oily sweat, that because toxins are often going through into the fat of an animal and a human, that would also mean that that's the area of the body that then gets sweated out, or is there not such strong correlation that some people can believe?
This is a very controversial subject, and one of the problems with the, quote, detox theory of sweating and of sauna bathing is that when scientists talk about detox and when lay people talk about detox, I think we're talking about 2 different things.
Okay.
When a lay person says, "Oh yes, I feel cleansed," and has this imaginings of clearing things out. Well, from a scientist's point of view, our detox organs are our liver and kidneys primarily. And yes, the skin is a detox organ, but it's a very tiny proportion of what actually happens. So let's say even fat-soluble things, we're much more likely to produce more urine during that sweating episode than we are actual sweat. And so the amounts that are in urine that are filtered through the kidneys and the liver beforehand, those are much more, they play a much greater role. So yes, there is this idea that maybe if you sweat regularly over long periods of time, those small amounts accumulate into bigger amounts. But that's still a big area of research.
So are we sweating internally as well then? Is that what you
Not necessarily, but we are mobilizing different toxicants from from our tissues, the fat, into the bloodstream, and that gets filtered through the liver and then gets filtered through our kidneys, which produces urine. So there's the highways for toxicants to go are much bigger through the liver and the kidneys than they are through the skin. But there is this small amount. There is some evidence suggesting that yes, certain heavy metals, certain plastic-based molecules are coming out in our sweat. No question of it. BPA is a big one that gets talked about a lot.
Yes, and you can see that in the sweat samples?
You can. Well, it's been a little bit inconsistent, but yes, there's been small studies. That's one of the problems with both sauna and sweat science right now. I said, really, a lot of these studies are so, less than 10 people. And it's hard to generalize things when it's that small. It's a small sample. So, but it takes big funding to be able to run these big randomized controlled trials that are the game changers when it comes to coming up with medical advice and things.
Okay, so when you talk about saunas and the benefits of it, there would be many benefits, and I'm sure we will touch on that. But what you're talking about is mobilizing of toxins. And why didn't you say that sort of like?
Well, look, I actually, that's what I've just recently did a big global sauna survey where I asked people, why do they sauna?
Yes.
And what came out of that is detox got talked about a lot, but the top reasons really were relaxation. That's the big one, and stress reduction and pain relief. So those were that was really what came out. That's why I think lay people are using the sauna according to my little snapshot. However, that's not where the research has been on sauna bathing. Most of the research has been around the cardiovascular benefits.
Okay.
And really, this is time to mention Jari Laukkanen, who's really spearheaded a lot of the sauna research out of Finland. And he did these amazing long-term prospective cohort studies, we call them, where he took a group of people, and it was both men and women, and he basically snapshotted how much they sauna bathe, because in Finland everyone sauna bathes, and divided them up into groups. Those who sauna bathe less or 1 time a week compared to 2 to 3 times a week compared to over 4 times a week, and he followed them over 20 years, which is that's a very strong study, but it's what we call an epidemiological study. So it makes associations, but doesn't tell you cause and effect. But what he found, and what he and his team found, has been amazing. I mean, there's less cardiovascular deaths, less cardiovascular events, less pneumonia, less asthma, COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, less, fewer strokes when you sauna bathe regularly. And this is mostly when you do over 4 times a week, so 4 or more times a week. So something's going on there, but the trouble is it's all in one place that all these studies are happening. And we need to start to get multi-center trials that try and test these hypotheses in other places.
Yeah.
Japan's been another area that's done a lot of mostly infrared sauna studies.
I think the origin of infrared saunas is, the 1970s Japan, where they figured out that, the resonant frequency that it creates with water molecules has certain benefits to the body. Right? I don't know how sophisticated back then that was, but that's certainly the origin that we know of infrared sauna.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And there's a researcher who's been researching saunas for about 20 years there, named, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name right, Tei, T-E-I. Anyway, he has shown, even in really progressed cardiovascular disease patients who have, say, congestive heart failure, that even just as few as 2 weeks of regular daily sauna bathing in an infrared sauna really brings down all the markers of heart failure.
Yeah, right. I think what I didn't realize for quite a while, and it would be great if you could talk to me about that. How important is heart health, and how much of an issue is it in the world?
Well, it's huge, no question about it. I mean, it's probably the #1 killer in first world countries right now, although cancer and heart disease are neck to neck.
Yeah.
But and our growing obesity problem in, again, not just first world countries, it's starting to spread to many different countries, is creating a burden on the health system that does need to look outside our usual boxes of just medications or prescribing exercise that a lot of people can't really do.
Yes. So part of the problem with just thinking really this through the heart failure. Yeah? So let's say, I'm quite obese. That puts pressure on just pumping the blood around. Like there's a lot of weight that I'm carrying constantly with me around, and probably it also reduces how fast the blood gets recycled and all the rest of it. And then what happens? The heart just hacks in and just stops.
Again, you're asking some difficult, interesting questions.
I always wonder, everyone says it's big, and I know people that have died from it or had a heart failure, and afterwards they weren't the same and all the rest of it, but I always wonder, so what exactly happens, and how do I know whether this happens to me, and what can I do about it, and so on. Yeah.
You know what? We don't really know. I asked myself this question about 2 years ago, starting to look about, what does cause obesity, and what is the issue? And we're still finding it out about. We're still trying to dissect what are the different. My suspicion is it's on a more microscopic level than you're thinking. We like to all think in physical amounts, what's happening to but actually it has to do with the hormones. I mean, the fat we end up accumulating, usually around the midriff area,
Yes, I know about those.
starts to secrete its own hormones. It's almost like it becomes a separate organ.
No, don't tell me that.
And
Yes.
yeah, so that's why losing weight is one of the first things we tell people. It's easy to say that. How you accomplish losing weight is a whole different story. But there's a lot going on in the losing weight community. I mean, I don't know if you've heard about the time-restricted eating,
Yes.
intermittent fasting.
Yes.
There's a lot going on, and that's, I have to say, in my own patient population, that's the only way I've seen people actually lose weight. Because trying to go on diets, there's no one diet that fits all. And there's no one diet that people can stick to. So you have to work with what people are already eating and restrict their caloric intake in different ways, in creative ways, or restrict when they're eating.
Yeah.
And I've had quite a few successes of people who mix and match those different intermittent fasting with low caloric times and are getting some good results. So that's answers part of your question, but it didn't answer the full question because, like I said, we're still trying to figure out. I think the underlying cause could be disrupted glucose metabolism,
Right.
and that's where when we eat, we all have different responses to, and I think it's our gut microbiome that's running all of this. And our gut microbiome is doing like a second digestion for us that we haven't really acknowledged enough. And now it brings me back to, that's one of the clinical trials I'd love to do around sauna bathing, is actually check people's gut microbiome
Yes.
before maybe a 3-month intensive sauna. So maybe they do it 3 times a week or 4 times a week for 3 months, and then check their stool microbiome diversity after that. These similar type studies have been done around exercise, and there's huge changes that go on. And I'd love to see if the changes around regular sauna bathing might be similar to the effects that we see.
So what would be your theory? What would happen? Is it something about the nervous system calming down once a day, at least in a sauna, that changes the gut flora, or would you think more about the heat leaves some alive and the not so beneficial ones die off?
The chicken and the egg, I don't know. I think perhaps when you eat or when you're exposed to the heat, it changes the ratio of the microbes you have, that changes the metabolites they make, which are packaged and used as our neurotransmitters. That's one theory. These are all theories. We're in the evidence-free zone right now. Another theory is that maybe it's not just the heat. Maybe it's the sweating. Although I'm suspecting heat's got to be a big player in that too. Yeah. The other thing is maybe maybe it has, who knows, maybe the heat is changing, maybe not necessarily the microbes directly, but changing, as you said, our autonomic nervous responses. And things that we use to measure that are things like heart rate variability right now, or arterial stiffness, or arterial elasticity measures. Maybe the heat is changing those dynamics. We don't know. I mean, we're still looking into all this, but certainly sauna bathing and exercise regular do change those factors. That's piling up the evidence around that.
So even if we don't know exactly how it works, we can certainly see there is a tendency that if we do those two things, maybe those two things together, that is a really good thing for the body.
Could be. Again, we're starting to look at that. And the other thing is timing. I mean, a lot of our studies right now are after one single session. Whereas really, what I'm interested in, if we're going to adopt sauna bathing as a lifestyle tool, it's not just running the one marathon of a sauna. It's got to be regular sauna bathing. And that takes time. And like I said, it takes also a lot of funding to be able to study people over long periods of time that are sauna bathing regularly. But I'll tell you what, it's easier to get people to sauna bathing regularly than it is for them to intensively exercise regularly. So that's where I think sauna is something we should be reaching for, or at least studying further.
Yeah, and I have people asking for, I think Dr. Gluckner at the Wellness Summit, Global Wellness Summit said, every house should have a sauna, an infrared sauna in there, because we can see the benefits really clearly, even though we can't explain them all. And I see, in terms of how, we live and breathe, it's much easier just to sit in a hot room, quite comfortable temperature, really. It doesn't have to be too hot, versus making yourself exercise. There's some personality types that can easily do and other not, but just sitting in a nice, warm, cozy place is certainly the easier thing to comply to.
Definitely, but I probably argue with you about just infrared. I think, really when we're talking about sauna, especially dry sauna bathing, we're talking about heat that can come in packaged in many different forms. So I think, the more traditional Finnish style sauna has many different heat sources. It can be an electric heater. It can be a wood burning fire. It can be gas. I had a gas sauna actually in Alaska. I can't say that I loved hearing the sound of the pump every time I had to light it, but I did enjoy the heat. It was a cleaner heat too than say if you had a wood burning sauna, because a lot of our friends had wood burning saunas. So I felt the air I was breathing was cleaner. And that's a big, this is again stuff that we're still looking into. What comes off our beautiful cedar? It smells wonderful, but I wonder if it sometimes triggers some sort of immune reactions in some people.
I would think so. Yeah. I mean, being in the industry, we found a wood that is non-allergenic. Allergenic, is that the word?
Allergenic, yeah.
Allergenic. Thanks. Which is basswood, so it's a really, really, I guess, in a sense, smellless wood, really hard, and doesn't give anything off. And we found that people who are hypersensitive to all sorts of things, that wood works for them. So you have a point. And we always say, look, there's an additional benefit when you see that, and that's aromatherapy, but it could go also the other way. If you say cedar aromatherapy might not be always the best thing for you.
I was going to say, I've only seen a few very tiny studies even asking some of these questions. So again, we're in this evidence-free zone, but But one of the things, I wanted to go back to my sauna survey, the global sauna survey. One of the things that surprised me were the adverse effects. So I was asking people about what did they notice that bothered them. And the top ones were not surprising. Dizziness, headache, and
coming
dehydration.
from using saunas?
That these are adverse effects that they had experienced before. And that makes sense when you think about the physiological changes that are happening. Sure, if you go in a bit dehydrated, you're much more likely to drop your blood pressure quite a bit, and that can, when your blood pressure drops, can make you feel a bit dizzy. So I wasn't surprised by that, but I was surprised by some of the number 4, number 5, number 6 reasons, and one of them was eye irritation. That really, I didn't realize so many people developed eye irritation. So that's why I've started to think about, what kinds of things? Maybe it's the
not the heat, you think?
Maybe it's the heat. Maybe it's sweat getting into your eyes, because sweat often is quite irritative. Some of the things that are in sweat weren't meant to get back into our eyes. So, and sweat content is different than tear content, and tears are another source of interesting biofluid knowledge, that there are startups working on glasses that collect tears and analyze lights in it. So there's a lot of really cool stuff going on around, we're looking at the body completely differently. There's a revolution going on, no question of it. And especially in the laboratory field, we have ways of analyzing for all different molecules that we didn't have 10 years ago. And that's what makes it difficult comparing studies that were done. Some of the first sauna studies that were done 10, 20 years ago, we didn't have those same strong laboratory skills that we do now. So,
what do you see in sweat? Like, what are the molecules that you find there, which probably what's in the body and what we might not recognize?
A lot of cytokines, so immune mediators. These are not things that we would have first guessed. But immune mediator, glucose, that's in fact, there's a small study that hasn't been well reproduced, but that showed that the glucose that's in your sweat can be loosely correlated to the glucose levels that's in your bloodstream, which is fascinating if they can make that work.
We're sweating sugar.
Yeah, we sweat sugar. We sweat sugar. We sweat salt. We know that. We taste it.
I get that.
And a lot of other electrolytes like potassium, zinc. And actually, you're bringing up a really interesting point is, especially when you sauna bathe so regularly, could you be depleting yourself?
Yeah, I was just going
always?
to ask that.
And we don't know. I mean, we haven't done the studies to check that.
Yeah.
But I would argue that we have a much smarter body that I think our microbes adjust. So, for example, microbes are unleashing a lot of these electrolytes from our foods, and I think they regulate how much of that gets released. So I think if we have lots of heat exposure, again, this is all theorizing.
Yeah.
But I think what's happening is they respond and say, oh no, we need more zinc because she's sweating out all that zinc. So,
Yes.
this is still an area of huge research. We just don't know.
Yeah, so it might be a good idea to actually remineralize the body in one way or another.
Yes, maybe, especially if you notice depletion symptoms afterwards.
Yeah.
So it depends.
Something that I heard in one of our guests was talking about minerals and saying, look, the body would utilize whatever comes their way if they don't have exactly what they need. So mercury will not come into your body easily and will be utilized or put into the body if you have, let's say for argument's sake, maybe it's zinc or iron available. But if that's not available, the next best is actually mercury. As it's
In my understanding, that can be the case with zinc and copper. So yes, like when you're not having enough zinc
Yes.
to meet your needs, it often copper will fill that space.
Okay.
And when we live in a place, like in this part of Queensland,
Yeah.
we have a lot of copper in our water and our soil. So yes, copper tends to be the next.
Yes.
But then again, it's much more complicated than I think just saying that. I think if anything, I'm very awestruck by the complexity of our body. And that's after being in the business for over 30 years dealing with humans, but especially on a basic science level, we're just touching the surface of the iceberg.
So when people talk about detox and they say, look, I have so much, I probably absorbed quite a bit of plastic through my environment and absorbed probably quite a bit of, let's say, lead from, petrol and what have you, and asbestos from brakes that used to be, and so on. So are those things that you find in the sweat? Some of them?
There is some evidence. Like I said, it's not always reproducible. But yes, BPA has been found in some studies. There's a great Canadian researcher, Stephen Genuis, who's done a really nice series showing that yes, there can be concentrations of the PFAS, perfluoride, the ones that the firefighters get exposed to.
Oh, okay.
The alkali, the perfluoroalkyl, which can be quite hard on our health system. There's elements of that, and actually it's still getting researched whether it's, we don't, there's so much we don't know. And it's not just BPA, there's all phthalates. He's done a whole series looking at organophosphate, pesticides.
Wow.
So there's elements of that in there. Are they in enough quantity to be significant for the quote detox you're talking about? We don't know yet.
So could we assume that if we sweat more, then more of these elements leave our body than if we wouldn't sweat?
That's some of the questions I'm trying to answer right now. I don't know.
Yeah, because it's probably quite hard to really know what's in the body as well, right? Because it's stored, so it's not in our blood as such. So it's not necessarily a representation if we would measure what's in the blood at the moment, what's coming out of the sweat. Therefore, whatever the balance of that one is what we have just taken out. It's not quite like that, huh?
Yes, and it's difficult to quantitate how much you sweat. I mean, it's easy to quantitate how much blood, when you collect to measure that, or quantitate urine. But collecting whole body sweat is still a work under progress.
Hey, out of interest, how do you do that? Do you put people into a whole body condom or something like that?
Well, I've been experimenting with many different ways, but actually the way I've resulted in, you can buy, actually there's sweat collectors that are designed for infants, unfortunately. Because that's our only use of sweat right now in the medical community, is using it to test for cystic fibrosis. We look at sweat chloride levels. And it's this little disc that gets strapped to, because infants don't sweat very much. So you have to actually induce it with a chemical. But one of my arguments is I'm not sure that chemically induced sweat reflects our true sweat. But that's where all the modeling, the sweat collection came from back in the 1940s. So we're breaking out of that model right now. But, and I forgot where we were going with it. Oh, in terms of collecting sweat. So I really wanted to use those first, but the amounts you collect are so minuscule for my needs that I said, I can't use that, and it was very expensive. So instead I'm using a laboratory pipette, actually, a micro pipette, and I'm just collecting the sweat droplets. Again, it's not ideal, it's not holistic enough. I'm missing the stuff that's already been aerosolized, but at least it gives me a start. And I'll be looking at the Queensland Alliance for Environmental Health Sciences will be doing the testing for me to look at organophosphate pesticide amounts.
Wow.
And what I'm trying to do with my latest research is compare infrared sauna directly with a traditional sauna, directly with exercise, and have a control intervention. And that's a real problem with a lot of the research going on around saunas, is that we're not including enough control groups. So without a control group, you can't argue that what's happening is happening because of your intervention. You have to say that isn't happening with an absent intervention. So I have this control intervention where people are just relaxing, and I'm doing the same thing to them that I do with the other interventions.
I see. Yeah. And what do we know so far? What the difference for the body is when you go into say traditional Finnish sauna and infrared sauna? I don't know what else you might be aware of, but are there different effects that we see in the body that are quite distinctly different?
Are you talking about a single session versus multiple sessions? They're very different works, they're different questions you're asking.
Wow, okay. Well, either.
Well, so far there haven't been any studies that directly compare. So that's why I'm hoping to provide some answers. Yes. So we don't know, but I suspect it's early days for me, so I can't really say, I haven't analyzed the data yet. But I am amazed how quickly people are sweating inside the infrared. It's not what I expected compared to the higher temperature Finnish saunas.
Yeah, when talking to people that do hypothermia treatments, and some of our saunas are used for that, infrared saunas, they're used for that. And what is found is that the core temperature does increase faster when you are in infrared saunas, which might be related to the heat source, and that we try to mimic with the frequency of the infrared, the frequency of water, so that it actually travels through the air, doesn't release its energy there, but travels all the way through the skin and then warms up the body faster. And it wouldn't be that hard to figure out whether people's core body temperature increases more in one sauna than the other, or faster than the other, yeah?
Well, that's some of the outcome measures I'm looking at now. And again, it's too early to say, but I think that's one potential explanation. Another is you're closer to your source heating in the infrared sauna I'm using versus the large Finnish sauna. I'm not so sure the core temperatures are that different though.
Okay.
But again, it's too early for me to conclude anything. This is all conjecture at this point. Just having a look at just the preliminary data. But one of my theories is I want to look at the differences between the various skin temperatures and the core body temperature. And actually, our skin temperatures are very different, and different individually,
really,
as well as intra-individually and inter-individually. So there's a lot of puzzle pieces in this puzzle, and I think we've only been looking at a few of them so far.
In research, artificial intelligence will become really handy to see certain patterns, And don't you think, as long as the samples are good and the sensors are good, it could really help to see patterns, or do you think?
I'm not sure artificial intelligence, I'm thinking more big data. I mean, we've got now these algorithms that can find patterns when we couldn't before. And that's what this new laboratory technology that I was mentioning before, that's based on mass spectrometry. It creates lots of data that needs crunching, and that's why we couldn't do this type of analysis 20 years ago because we didn't have the computer capacity to do it, but we do now.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with the genetic revolutions going on, and the epigenetic. There are so many genes in our body that are turning off and turning on, and it boggles the mind, but if you can start to collect it and be systematic with big data, you can start to see patterns.
Yeah.
So yes, that's where I think big data, yes.
Oh, that's exciting. So you would take the DNA sample of people before they use heat therapy of some sort and see whether if you have a big enough sample, people sample, you might see a correlation that always one gene changes on and off when they use that. That's frequently every 4.
Fascinating question. It's not the DNA. Our DNA doesn't change. We're born with our DNA. But it's the epigenetic, the expression, we call it gene expression, that changes. And there actually has been a Saudi Arabian study. I just found this out when I went to the International Sauna Congress last year. There was a Danish researcher who presented, he was a chemometrics expert, so he's a big data IT person, who he presented his results showing which genes turn on and off in targeted, so looking at gene arrays, microarrays, so that's looking at certain genes that we know have effects on metabolism and things. And he demonstrated that with going into the sauna, that yes, there was a pattern of certain genes turning on, certain genes turning off that matches, quote, stress. But that's where we think of it as a good stress, like exercise. Now he hasn't been able to compare that directly to exercise yet, but that's some future work that would be fascinating to see if similar genes turn on and off. Genes that are associated maybe with, quote, heat shock proteins, which I know we've talked, heat shock proteins get turned on and off by all kinds of stressors. Not just heat, not just exercise.
No.
Certain emotional stress can turn on heat shock proteins. So this is all early days. It's a whole other environment we're looking into. But yeah, there's some chance. But what was fascinating about what he said when I talked to him later, I said, well, should I be taking some blood and checking which genes are turning on and off with my sauna experience? And he said, I wouldn't, because he said the stress of putting a needle into your arm could be what's causing some of those. That's where you need control.
Yes.
You can't. So a lot of these changes we're seeing around sauna might be because the stress of putting a needle into
So
our
the test group should then also give the blood,
exactly.
You
might see the similar stress is happening just from having that.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with trying to sample blood. And again, blood, you have to ask ourselves, how do we end up making blood this gold standard sample to reflect our body? I mean, yes, it's the most hidden and it circulates all over our body, but my argument is I think we should be developing algorithms with big data that put together not just analyzing blood, but tears, sweat, urine, all the, earwax.
Maybe hair or?
Hair, possibly. Hair, it's difficult because there's a lot of contamination issues. Same thing with sweat. We didn't even talk about that, but
when you use soap or whatever.
Exactly. Like even now with my trial right now, I'm having to tell people, don't use deodorant, don't use soap, and it's hard for them. There's a number of the times they came and go, oh my God. I was like, well, okay, well, go ahead and I'll just make a note of that, so we'll see if it makes a difference.
Fascinating.
So there's so many different variables right now.
I think I understand epigenetics now. So basically, we have DNA, and that's different for everyone. But within that gene in the DNA, that might be not switched on or off. So epigenetics is just about on and off.
Well, okay.
If you don't mind.
Let's back up. Okay, so you've got your genes.
Yes.
And that's what you're born with. And say people who are identical twins, they actually have the same set of DNA. Well, yeah, the identical versus non-identical twins, or whatever. So you have your genes, but we interact with our environments, and that's what turns on and off the sections of DNA that we actually turn into proteins. And we do that using things called messenger RNA. And so your DNA, in fact, a lot of our DNA, we still don't understand all its uses. We know the sections, the human genome got completely mapped out in 2001, And we only know a portion of sections. And we used to call the other portions junk
Yes,
DNA.
yes, I remember.
Whereas now we're finding out junk DNA is not junk. It's a lot of regulatory signaling that's going on in that, quote, junk DNA.
Yeah.
But basically, you've got messenger RNA that attaches, you unwind DNA, you have messenger RNA that attaches the DNA, makes a copy, and that goes on to your to your cells to say, produce this protein. And we also have little stops and starts, so there's different ways of turning on and off gene expression. So yes, in a way, what you just said, epigenetics is this whole science of gene expression turning on and off, and what things cause that to happen.
Yeah. So if everything goes well, then we figure out, first of all, that heat shock protein is a good thing, and I would love to explain just a little bit those, but before we go there, so let's say heat shock proteins are actually caused mainly by exercise and being exposed to heat and maybe certain thoughts in your head that creates stress. That then gives a message to all 100 trillion cells in the body, or just like a part of maybe an area of the body, and those cells do nothing else than but producing heat shock proteins. Is that what sort of happens?
Well, heat shock proteins come from inside cells and not necessarily all cells. So it depends. And the other thing is our information has to do with what questions we've asked.
Yes.
So has everyone asked the right questions yet? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But according to the questions we've asked around exercise, what happens is certain cells, maybe cells in your muscles, is where a lot of the heat shock protein stuff has come from. It's skeletal muscle versus, I think in sauna, it might have to do more with your smooth muscle, your autonomic muscles that you don't think about firing on and off. So it's the layers of complexity really do bog your mind when you start to look at the macro, vision of these interventions.
And would we say we like heat shock proteins to be present?
It depends, but heat shock proteins get released from different stressors. What they do is they help protect certain proteins to keep them working well. Because proteins are very sensitive to the conformation. They need to be in a special conformation to bind to receptors and to. This has gone way beyond the scope of what you were going to ask. This is, but there's, I'm not sure I'm doing it justice. This is 2 years of biology course, trying to be summarized. So I think I might be getting out of
That's all right, but overall, there could be some benefits from using heat shock proteins and their support proteins, whatever they're used for, that support the body. So there could be certainly a positive impact by creating those through something.
There could be, and the way I look at it is I think there's probably over 1,000 genes that are getting affected, and heat shock proteins are one of these classes of genes.
Wow.
So again, it's one of the pieces, definitely. I think it's a piece of a puzzle, but it's a piece of a puzzle we don't completely understand.
I see. That makes sense.
And actually, another thing I want to mention when we're talking about heat shock proteins, because another thing that heat shock proteins can affect, we think, is men's testes and sperm production. So this doesn't get talked a lot about in the sauna, but there's a great Italian study that very elegantly showed, and there's a lot of study beforehand that backs that up, that basically sperms, your sperm, the morphology, the activities of it, the gene get totally altered by heat.
Yeah, and I think because I learned that when you, I don't know where I heard it, but like when you wear briefs versus shorts, that there's that's not particularly good if there's not the natural regulation of how far they are away from the body and how well they cool, which leads me to think like if you get into a really hot environment, that might be a problem. Although there are many people living in really hot environments, does that mean that they have a problem reproducing? Or
See, these are good questions. But this Italian study was beautiful.
Okay, what did it say?
It followed only, again, we're talking a small number of men. I think it was less than 10 men or something. And they, maybe 13, but they checked their sperm underneath the microscope and did all kinds of tests about the chromatin, so the DNA of the sperm, and certain genes. They targeted, I believe it was heat shock proteins that they looked at. And then they had the men do 3 months of I think it was 2 times or 3 times a week sauna. And then 3 months later, they did the same thing. And they showed that, yes, that sperm weren't swimming as fast. They weren't, their function was altered, very adversely altered. But what's interesting, they didn't stop there. So they waited 3 months and had the men not sauna, and then revisited, and it had recovered by 6 months at a time. It had partially recovered at 3 months, but 6 months after stopping the sauna, it all came back to normal. So this is a reversible change that we're seeing. And this was using a Finnish style sauna. This hasn't been done with infrared yet, but that's another one of those lovely trials I'd love to do. Yeah, I need a whole
whole department.
Yes, I love that. Yes.
Why do you think people are looking into saunas right now? Is it about the buzz and the expectation that some of the theories will be quantified and said, it's good for detox? Or well, you saw that in your survey probably. Why do people actually use saunas?
Yeah, well, as I think we were discussing before, that the top reasons people are using the saunas, number one is relaxation. It's not very often in a study that you'll get 100% saying the same thing, but they all said relaxation. This is over 500 people all over the world. They all sauna to relax, and relaxation happens in the sauna. And those are almost 2 different things to ask. But that was pretty powerful because that's something we assume, but it's never really been demonstrated. So that was an interesting finding. But what interested me, so back pain and musculoskeletal pain were the 2 things that when people had a health problem, those were the top 2 problems that they used sauna for. So pain relief. But when I actually asked, why do you sauna? What are your motivations to sauna? Relaxation and de-stressing. And stress is such a fascinating topic and I think you asked, why are people using the sauna? Well, I think life is getting more stressful, and we're all searching for ways to reduce that stress. And I think sauna can provide that for many of us. And then the third thing was pain relief. So, and I think this whole idea of using sauna for pain relief is something that is still in its early stages. But that's another area I would like to really study. So I think certain, we don't completely understand how we sense pain, but I think sauna bathing can affect that, modulate that.
Dr. Rolly Duncan was talking about the element P that indicates where there is a problem with the pain element. And that his theory, and I don't know if that has been quantified in research either, and you probably know, through vessel dilation, you have more, which is caused through infrared saunas. I don't know if it's also caused through normal saunas. At that moment, it flushes through the system, and so these elements that indicate here's pain, there's a problem, and people can feel the hurt. Those elements are flushed out, and at that moment, the pain is reduced. So there's actually a relief just because the messages for pain are not there. Doesn't mean that actually the problems are gone.
Look, there's been some studies, but again, that's a bit reductionist, I think. Again, it's very complex what's going on. And yes, I think whether it's the heat, and there is vasodilation with both types of dry saunas. We didn't talk about wet saunas yet, steam saunas. And there's been some fascinating studies around steam saunas. And when you ask people, and I asked that in my global sauna survey, some people are very partial to steam saunas, but it's fascinating to me because it's been elegantly demonstrated that you don't sweat as much in a steam sauna. You feel like you are, but all that sweat is actually condensed moisture because it's so humid in the environment. But obviously, if people are getting benefits from that, then that begs that the heat might be more of an underlying player. But there's certainly some people that are much more partial than to a steam sauna.
What's the temperature in
good question. I think it varies. There's different cultural variations. There's the Turkish Hammam. There's it varies, and it's the steam sauna tends to be used a lot in sports settings. So I'm not an expert on the steam sauna. More my dry sauna is more my interest.
Same.
But good question. I mean, obviously I think it's similar, but we also can't tolerate being in a steam sauna for as long because you've cut off your sweating. So sweating is our thermoregulatory response to heat. So that's why you can't last in a steam sauna near as long as you can in a dry sauna.
Yeah, right. Okay. And if we assume that a longer session is better than a shorter, then we want to go into the dry, maybe.
That's where I've been tending more towards dry, but yeah. No, and that's where sweating is fascinating. So there's sweat, and then there's the act of sweating, which, some evolutionary biologists say it is what makes us top dog of the mammalian world, because we're one of the few mammalian species that actually can thermoregulate while we're exerting ourselves maximally. So yes, we can't run faster than a cheetah, but we can outrun a cheetah because we can sweat while we're running. Whereas a cheetah, yeah, it can go very fast and then has to stop and pant to bring down its core body temperature. Whereas that's an evolutionary advantage that we have.
Amazing. Yeah.
So sweating's funny. There's a lot of cultures that really have vilified sweating when really I think we should be embracing our sweating more. It's doing some pretty amazing things for our body. And I hope I can uncover more.
Yes. Well, it's great that you also look into exercise because, of course, you sweat a lot when doing that.
Interestingly, I'm finding people don't sweat as much when they exercise, at least at the same heart rates and blood pressures as they do. But again, this is early days. I have to wait and see what my data shows. But that's preliminary-wise, I've been surprised. Yeah, I'm having troubles getting sweat off people exercising in the same types of length of time and length of intensity as you do when you're in a sauna.
Yeah, right. Have you looked into the combination of exercise and having a sauna afterwards or something like that?
Not so much. There is some research on that, but that hasn't been a huge area of my focus yet. But I do suspect there's some synergism going on.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been a few, again, small studies that have shown some benefits. Better release of oxygen from your hemoglobin. There's some really wild and woolly studies out there that were fascinating to read. But they tend to publish the benefits. But that's another problem with sauna research, is that we like to publish the benefits. We don't like to talk about when we get findings that are adverse. There's not that whole Italian study hasn't gotten talked up enough.
Yeah, or mobilizing toxins when you're pregnant or breastfeeding, that will be one that we always point out to our customers. Be really aware of that. We can't quantify it, we can't tell how bad that is, or if that is bad, but it would make sense that there is an impact that is not such a good thing.
There is research to demonstrate that breastfeeding is one of our most potent, quote, detox ways for women.
Into the child.
Into the breast milk,
And then into the child.
I know it's.
Well, let's hope that the children then can much better detoxify whatever comes out of the mother.
Well, we hope, but there's been some breast milk studies that show quite high levels of some of these fat soluble toxins we were talking before. So now is it in the amounts that are significant? I don't know.
Yeah, right.
But there are some studies. I was glad that I found that out after I breastfed as opposed to before.
And your kid's all right.
She seems to be okay.
Yeah,
she's surviving.
She's gorgeous. Hey, one thing that I wonder whether you came across people that that can't sweat straight away when they go into saunas, but after a few sessions. And I have heard theories about it, but I can't quite remember what they are. But is there something that people almost have to relearn or reopen pores or whatever it is to get to the point again that they can sweat?
Fascinating question. And again, I have a hypothesis.
Yes.
I think getting sauna fit is very analogous to getting exercise fit. So for example, you don't tell someone to go out there and run a marathon, they can't do it yet. So that's in essence what we're asking some people to do when their thermoregulatory system hasn't gotten used enough. So I have had many people say to me, I don't sweat in a sauna. Yeah, they might not sweat in that first one, or it's hard, but after they've been doing it 3 months, gradually building up, suddenly they become sweaters. And I have heard that many times. So I think that whatever kind of adjustment type metabolisms are happening, I think it takes training. I think you need to sauna train. So that's, that's my answer.
Yeah.
That's my guess answer to that question.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so it's definitely real, right?
Oh yeah, no, and I think we all, based on where we're born, what kind of thermal, exposures we've had, we all have different, and our internal responses too, which is, epigenetically and genetically determined, all play factors. Again, this is a big puzzle, and we like to reduce things to one of two of the pieces, but to look at that whole puzzle is awesome. And I can't wait as we're filling in certain parts of it.
Yeah. When do you expect some of your research to be published? Do you know?
Well, the Global Sauna Survey got published this year. The clinical, looking at all the clinical studies that have been done on sauna that meet a certain criteria of evidence was published the year before. I've published a little bit on sweat content. That was about 3 years ago. I'm hoping my current study will get published next year.
Oh, exciting.
But yeah, I'm still collecting data now. So, and it's been fascinating.
I know you have looked into cardiovascular health in relationship to saunas. So why is there an effect? Have you figured out why there's something happening to the heart when we go into heat?
Good question. It's that area, and again, it's that single session versus multiple sessions.
Okay.
So there's been studies that look at one session of sauna, and most of them in the finish.
Yeah.
You definitely see changes in your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, but your vascular resistance, you get a more vasodilation that happens.
So vasodilation meaning like actually the blood vessels themselves open up, or is it the pressure that increases so that they...
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
And what metabolites modulate that is still an area of research. There's been a lot on nitric oxide. So perhaps nitric oxide is a very potent vasodilator inside our blood vessels. Maybe heat is increasing. There's been some studies that show that endothelial nitric oxide synthetase levels go up. So that's that gene expression of making more nitric oxide. So perhaps, but we did, again, it's still, is it heat shock proteins that induce that? We don't know. But yeah, certainly around a single session of sauna, you can see certain physiological characteristics, but that's still getting debated. Like, for example, we didn't really stress the fact that blood pressure goes up so much inside a sauna till just a really nice research study came out just this year that demonstrated, guess what? Your blood pressure goes up quite a bit. And then it's after sauna bathing that all the benefits, that's when you really open up. So the stressor of being in a sauna is like running that marathon. And that's what makes me think it's doing it repeatedly and getting training with it and getting these mechanisms flowing that ends up with the health benefits. But this is all still being studied.
Wow.
And this also brings another question of who shouldn't sauna bathe?
Yes.
And that we don't know the full answer to that. And that's a big hurdle before we can get it out, especially in hospital settings or aged care settings where I'd like to see a lot more sauna.
Exactly.
But we need to ask that question and answer it more fully than it has been. Right now it's just been anecdotal. Oh yes, someone with aortic stenosis shouldn't sauna bathe, but we haven't actually studied what is it. Is it people who have very low blood pressure? Is it because their blood pressure drops even more? I mean, what we do know is alcohol, and if you have too much alcohol during a sauna, that can be a lethal mix. So when they've looked at deaths in Eastern Europe and Northern Europe, yes, sauna bathing with alcohol, especially large amounts, and sauna bathing alone are two things that are quite risky. And it was funny because I just heard some sauna precautions recently saying, you should never drink alcohol while you sauna. And I was thinking to myself about when I went to Sweden and Finland and watched, and I said, try telling that to people who've been sauna bathing their whole life, and they, a beer is what they have as soon as they come out. This isn't evidence-based yet. But there is some, should be mindful of that. And then again about this sperm, does that mean fertility is affected? Well, a lot of the Finns that I talked to poo-poo, they said we don't have a fertility problem, so obviously sauna must not be affected. But I'm like, that's not quite the scientific way to look at it. You know? So, but I think those, that needs further study. And right now we tend to be very phobic around cardiac conditions. But yet, all this research is showing benefits in the cardiovascular system. So that's where I think we need to further make some definitions, get a sense of who shouldn't sauna and who could benefit.
Yeah.
And these are also the people who can't exercise. And I think if we look at studies of these same sick populations and get them to try and exercise, of course, there's risks there too. But we have to look at sauna fairly and realize we just need to know where those lines are so we can draw them but get the people who could benefit in the sauna. And that's something we haven't even talked about, are the social effects of sauna.
Fantastic. Neither have I thought about it really.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of my colleagues down in Sydney, Jack Saunas, that's his whole focus of study, is looking at the social interactions around sauna.
Specific at that, not social
So
interactions.
he's a social scientist, and he is fascinated. That's what he studies.
Super.
And in fact, we're trying to maybe get together and do a study around sleep, because didn't talk about that, but in my little sauna study, people said not only did they sleep better, and this was about 2/3 of people said sleep better, but more than one night, that it would last through 2 nights in general. Which again makes you stop and go, well, is it just the heat? I don't know. It's gotta be triggering some mechanisms that last longer than just your response to that one episode of heat. So we want to do a sleep study. I'd love to have people wear the sleep stuff. Track them for a week after doing some regular saunas. I think it'd be fascinating.
I use some wearable, what do you call this?
Oh, the Aura ring?
Yeah, and one reason for that is because more and more people are interested in, I guess, having a little bit better handle on their data, on their own performance of the body. Whether this is accurate or not is another question, but it can assist you or your medical guide, whoever that might be, doing some analysis how you go. And I mean, the spring does tell you, you're looking a little bit off, and have the feeling you should sleep a little bit longer tomorrow because you really don't have the energy. And I would love to just indicate whenever I have a sauna, and then run that data through a correlation whether my sleep is different. I've never thought actually about that, but I would love to see that more happening, because quantifying these things would be great.
Yeah, and look, I think that's you're wearing a biofeedback device, and that's the other thing. I mean, one of the things we think about with saunas is it is altering our autonomic responses, and you can use those to track heart rate variability. I've definitely been seeing some research around that, and just anecdotal people like yourself who are playing with their data.
It is play, yeah.
Yeah, and look, we're all individualized. So I think that is how we've got to look at it. So good on you.
I certainly hear futurists will talk about that more and more and say, there is a need from people to wanting to own more their data and wanting to know more. But I think there's also, because it's not as expensive anymore, that a measure device of this type, or who knows, maybe sweat devices eventually will also get to the point where people can just check, like you can now do a DNA test or
or this microbiome test.
Yes, exactly.
And look, you're bringing up a really good point. I mean, our scientific rigor model, these randomized controlled trials, we're looking at population-based changes. We're not looking at individual. And that's where this microbiome revolution is turning that upside down and saying, look, yes, randomized controlled trials, especially when you have thousands, leads you in the right direction. But we're not being as focused as we could be now. The technology is there to be more focused. I want to compare bananas to bananas. I don't want to just know what works for bananas in this sea of apples and bananas and pears. I want people that, with the same type of, we need to get more detail.
Yeah.
We have the technology, and we're not organized yet enough. It's happening. It is happening.
Yeah.
And I think it's starting to own your individual health data that is part of that.
Yeah.
Part of that revolution.
Just for fun, let's just come back to the social effects of saunas.
Okay.
So is there any theory what they might be, those social effects?
Well, look, quality of life indicators
Yeah.
have been done in many different sauna interventional studies, and they all show benefits, no question. So what is happening? Good question. I mean, some of these studies looked at people just sauna bathing by themselves versus sauna bathing in a group. group. And there's even an American academic who does this thing called sweat therapy, uses saunas and uses sweating together as part of the modality. And is this communications that are going on between sweat like we were talking about? Or is this just people all collectively relaxing?
Yeah.
You know, this is all stuff to be explored.
Yeah, and sweat lodges, having been around for
thousands
of years, they are really intentionally used also to, I guess, clear your mind or certainly alter your perception of certain things. And
definitely. And when you start talking to people, sometimes you can have a bad sweat lodge experience. Is that because of other people's sweat, or is that because of where you're? All these are all variables that will be fascinating to consider, but. Definitely, when I started sauna bathing in Alaska, there was a culture around it. It was the social benefits I was getting out of it, not just the health benefits.
Yes.
But it took me a long time to figure out the health benefits. I got the social benefits straight away. I mean, that used to be in wintertime, that was our way of all coming together. We usually sauna and then have a nice potluck meal afterwards. It was...
I grew up like that too, even as teenagers we would do that. And I like to go to the sauna center or to it. Not so often they're part of a gym or something like that, and they or sort of a spa environment, swimming pool environment. And in Northern Germany, it's very normal to go there after work, And so for them, it's a way to socialize. And I'm thinking maybe it's actually not a good idea to give them, a sauna because they would actually stay home rather than socialize. Plus, they really enjoy going out.
Well, you spurred two thoughts with this thought. First, we've got to talk about Aufguss. I mean, if we're going to talk about the social effects of sauna, we've got to talk about Aufguss.
Okay.
So do you know about Aufguss?
Yeah, you put water onto...
No, that's Lloyd. No, Aufguss is this whole performance that goes on in public saunas. And I believe started in Germany. I think Aufguss is the German...
right.
But it is wild in Europe right now. And when I went to the International Sauna Congress, oh my gosh, the Aufguss, that's where I think a lot of the younger sauna bathers are coming out of, is this whole performance. So the Aufguss is this person who uses a towel or other implement to circulate the hot air in a largish sauna, something that sits more than 10 people. I think, though, I've heard of really large ones in Berlin. But and it's a performance, but it involves the people that are in the sauna. So what I experienced was amazing. I mean, it was a women-only one that I went to when I was in Sweden, and there were questions, like deep philosophical questions that were directed to different people, and it reminded me of the sweat lodge experience. It was just full on. It was very philosophical, but there I was sweating with these other women, So, and also, whether clothes are on, clothes are off. This is always a debate that gets talked about. And in Australia, the first thing people look at me when I say, I sauna bathe regularly, they're like, really? Does that mean sex in the sauna? And that's another question that always gets asked. And actually, that was a finding in my study that was a little bit touchy to have to deal with. Is that, nearly a third of people did say that sexual intent was part of what motivated them in sauna, which I was quite shocked by.
Because it's so hot and it doesn't feel like that's the topic that would come to mind first when you're in such an environment. But anyway,
there's a lot of literature around who have sex with men. That's where they meet their partner. There's layers to this. So the socializing around sauna is quite intricate and complex.
Fascinating. Who would have guessed?
Yeah. So it was hard. I had to fight hard to even ask the sex question in the actual survey because ethics was on me saying, that's very private. But I'm like, if we don't ask them, we're gonna know.
No, exactly. Wow.
And so finally I was able to get it, and I had to sanitize it. Oh my gosh, if you look at the question, it's like ridiculous. But I finally got it through, and so I think a lot's going on. Whether it is the scant of clothing, and in many parts of Europe, you don't wear clothing when you go in. But every country, every nation, every subpocket has a different way, subculture of sauna. There's some that always keep the genders separate. There are others where it's always mixed. I mean, there's all these different avenues to sauna bathe. So, yeah, what's going on, we don't know. But going back to your question about, well, what's going on socially, no question of the quality of life indicators have always been demonstrated to be elevated. And that's even in chronic pain populations, chronic fatigue populations. And a lot of these studies are done in Japan and Korea. So no question, the quality of life indicators go up with regular sauna bathing. But how and what's the mechanism?
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
By the way, of course, it's a German word. It means pour on, but of course, in that context, it means more than obviously just pouring on water, but also
you've got
pouring
it. Sebastian, you have got to check out that. There was the Off-Coast World Championships. It's every September in Germany. You've got to start to check it out. And it's not just men, it's men and women. And there's some pretty awesome women off-coast out there. Yeah, so you've got to check that out.
Yeah.
And look, I think that's something, I think it's something that could be modulated for infrared too. So I said there were two things that your idea spurned me on. Another is the elderly. We often tell, you were mentioning to your parents, and I don't know how old your parents are, but a lot of the elderly are very afraid to step into a sauna because of the cardiac scares and things.
Yeah.
When I think actually they're a population that may actually benefit a lot, and for the social aspects. So I think, creating larger dry saunas in aged care facilities.
Yes, I would love to see that, I think.
To bring people together and get some of those cardiovascular benefits and anti-Alzheimer benefits. That's something I think I didn't mention, but Jari Laakkonen in his long epidemiological study, fewer cases of Alzheimer's by nearly a third if you sauna bathe that 4 times a week or more, and that was in men and women. So there's something going on. There's some life-enhancing mechanisms going on that we need to understand better and implement as part of our health maintenance.
And the tradition of saunas have been around so long in most countries or in most cultures, which really indicates, well, there's something in for everyone. Otherwise, it wouldn't have survived and become so big, I guess.
Yes, I agree with that. But I want to see it in the future. That's that's what it is.
Exactly.
And actually, you're making a good point. We think of Europe, we think of Northern Europe, but the other thing in my survey I found is that in Australia and America, they are using more infrared, a more percentage of infrared than traditional. As opposed to Europe, there's certain pockets of Europe, like England, that are more welcoming to infrared, but in general there's been a real polarizing of where, but infrared has some advantages in that it's more affordable usually. It's usually easy, it's easier, it can plug into the wall, you don't have to have special electrics for a lot of time. So there are advantages that I think need to be a light shined on that. And but at the same time, recognizing that the larger ones, the trouble with infrared is you would need quite a lot to have a large.
Like for the traditional Finnish saunas are easily built very large, and infrared saunas, because you need to be fairly close to the heaters, and the heaters are not really made to warm up the space.
Quite so. I mean, when you think of hot yoga, Bikram yoga, it's usually infrared. It's, at least all the studios I've seen so far have been infrared, but they're only aiming for 40 degrees, whereas we want to push to 60 usually for the studies that we see around infrared. Is
there anything else when you think about the survey that you did that sort of sprang out?
I could keep you busy for 5 hours, but no, I would love if, unfortunately it's behind a paywall. That's the trouble with doing research. Okay. It won't be freely available to read for another year. It's usually 12 months.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yes.
I had a complimentary time for the first month, but after that now. So I'd love it. It'll be on the Sauna Science Facebook. I will definitely post. It's been posted, but it's no longer. You can't access it now, but you will next year. So.
And you do have a summary that you put together of your survey as well.
Yeah, in fact, I gave you and that has been posted on certain research networks, but maybe I need to post that on the Facebook site.
Yeah, that would be great.
Try to do that.
Yeah. Oh, this was really interesting. I have a few more questions that I actually didn't tell you in advance about, but they're very simple.
Okay.
Just from a perspective of what gets you out of bed every morning, what would you say is number one reason?
Well, definitely, I think this PhD and wanting to get a message out that there are lifestyle options that are endless, and I think sauna bathing represents one of these. It's very accessible that we just haven't been able to organize around yet.
Yeah.
And I think, I know from talking to a lot of my patients, especially if you get diagnosed with any type of medical condition, you don't want to be taking 5-7 pills, which is our norm for how the medical establishment has been treating a lot of chronic disease especially. So we need to be exploring. I think the Australian Society of Lifestyle Medicine is a really good avenue that's trying to say, let's look at the food we eat, let's look at our activity levels, let's look at other things. So what gets me up right now, I want sauna to be on that list. I think, and high up on the list, not just mentioned. You know, it needs to be presented in a package that people can look at and adapt for themselves. And we're just not there yet, but we're getting there. So yes, that gets me up. That gets me going.
And what are the 3 favorite things in life that you love to do?
3 favorite things.
Yeah.
Well, I obviously love my family. I mean,
Yes.
I like spending time with them. And I do like sauna bathing, so that's in there too. And I do like to exercise too. So I'm definitely coming from someone who loves to walk in nature, and so I definitely like walking a lot.
And one more for you. Why do you think we exist?
Oh, I think we were planted here by aliens.
We are the aliens?
Yeah, I think we are the aliens.
And due to only live one lifetime, or actually, you know?
I don't pretend to know the answer to that. My feeling is I think when I look at science, especially here I am, I'm a scientist.
Yeah.
Nothing just ends. Everything is recycled. So I think our energies are recycled too. Can I tell you what that is? How it is? I have no idea, but I do think our energy got here from somewhere else. And I think that's why it's so important that we protect our planet right now, because we've always just been visitors. This is my feeling.
Yeah,
but you're getting into, spiritual, philosophical realms that might
No, it's not your personal opinion, but
I'm definitely, I feel like we didn't just come to be, is my feeling. I think we're recycled. We're all recycled.
Any idea why?
Oh, that's like looking up in the sky and trying to decide where's the end of the universe. I don't know.
Yeah.
It definitely kept me awake a number of times, looking up there, being awestruck. I don't know.
Yeah, I like that idea, being visitor. Yeah. Yeah, it means really look after the house that you use for visiting.
Yeah. And that's even another dimension about sauna is how to make saunas more greener. That is, I feel we should be able to figure out a way to make solar saunas. I mean, I'm not the engineer that can do that, but I know it's coming, So that way we can make our saunas more, more neutral in terms of consumption and output. Because, even these smoke saunas that are so popular right now in Finland, they're still producing an emission that we need to be cutting down on. So, and that goes with almost any type of sauna. So, yes, figuring out how to harness that and recycling the energy that goes in the saunas. Actually, that reminds me of a very interesting paper that was looking at Finnish architectural designs where they were using the heat of the sauna, counting on people using the sauna, and using that, ducting that heat to heat these closed environments. And I thought, that's the kind of thinking. We need to be thinking about how we can.
Perfect. Yeah.
So.
Thanks for that. Yeah. Food for thought. Have a think about that, something that we manufacture. Yeah,
and saunas produce, we can use something like that heat energy, not just let it dissipate into the environment. I haven't seen enough of how to do that, but I think that would be
Absolutely.
some fascinating avenues to explore too.
Well, thank you very much for coming and spending so much time with us and answering all these amazing questions, giving all this information, and more food for thoughts and more questions, I reckon.
Well, thank you for asking the questions, because that's the first step. We've got to ask those questions.
Yeah.
So, and I love to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. I look forward to have you on again if you would, and see where research leads you. Yeah.
Definitely. I hope I'll have more
please.
findings to talk about.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Sebastian.